You know that cold, sinking dread of a text sent to the wrong person. Now imagine that text says, "I miss you so much," and the recipient isn't your ex. It's the billionaire CEO of the company you work for, a woman who routinely guts entire departments before her morning coffee. That's exactly what Liam did at 2 in the morning. He expected a termination letter. Instead, she cornered him in an empty boardroom, locked the door, and whispered 3 words that changed everything. The apartment smelled of stale Cheerios and burning electronics. Liam rubbed the heels of his hands into his eyes until sparks danced in his vision. The glow of his dual monitors was the only light in the living room, casting sharp blue shadows across the scatter of Lego bricks on the rug. It was 2:14 a.m. on a Tuesday. For the past 9 hours, Liam had been untangling a catastrophic failure in the primary database of Hayes Logistics, surviving on nothing but lukewarm tap water and the adrenaline of impending unemployment. He was a mid-level systems architect, a single dad, a man who measured his life in coffee cups and his daughter's shoe sizes. Chloe was 6, currently fast asleep in the next room, oblivious to the fact that her father was single-handedly keeping a $40 billion supply chain from grinding to a halt. His phone buzzed against the desk, a harsh, rattling sound. Liam jumped, his hand knocking over an empty mug. He snatched the phone. A text from his mother. "Is Chloe asleep? Did you figure out the work thing? We miss you guys." He exhaled a long, ragged breath, his shoulders dropping 2 inches. His mother lived 3 states away, and due to the crushing weight of his job, he hadn't seen her in 6 months. He missed her. He missed his dad. He missed the version of his life where he wasn't constantly vibrating with exhaustion. He unlocked his screen. His thumb hovered over the keyboard. His brain felt like it was packed with wet cotton. The database migration had required him to have the direct contact numbers of several executives on standby, including the CEO, Morgan Hayes. Her number had been added to his favorites list temporarily, right next to his mother's contact, which was simply saved as Mom. Morgan Hayes was a phantom in the office, a 34-year-old prodigy who had inherited a failing shipping company and turned it into an unassailable tech logistics empire. She was known for an icy demeanor, a wardrobe of impeccably tailored black suits, and a terrifying ability to spot weakness in a balance sheet from 50 feet away. Liam had spoken to her exactly once, during a disastrous server crash a year ago. She had looked at him with dark, calculating eyes, asked if he could fix it, and when he said yes, she had simply nodded and walked away. Liam's heavy, sleep-deprived thumb tapped the screen. He opened what he thought was the message thread with his mother. He typed quickly, not looking at the name at the top of the screen, just letting the exhaustion bleed out of him. "I miss you too. So much. It's been a nightmare here tonight, but I'm surviving. Can't wait to see you." He hit send. The satisfying little swoosh sounded loud in the quiet apartment. He tossed the phone onto the desk, leaned back in his ergonomic chair, and cracked his neck. The database was finally stable. The migration was complete. He had saved the company from a multi-million-dollar bottleneck. He could finally sleep for 3 hours before Chloe woke up demanding dinosaur oatmeal. As he reached for the power button on his monitor, his phone screen lit up with a delivery receipt. Liam glanced at it. The blood in his veins turned to ice. The name at the top of the text thread didn't say Mom. It said, Morgan Hayes. CEO, emergency. Liam stared at the glowing rectangle. The world seemed to drop out from beneath his chair. He picked up the phone with trembling fingers as if it were a live grenade. "I miss you too. So much. It's been a nightmare here tonight, but I'm surviving. Can't wait to see you." Delivered to the billionaire owner of his company. He jammed his finger against the message, desperately looking for an unsend option. But it was a standard SMS. It was gone. It was sitting on the encrypted $1,000 smartphone of a woman who fired vice presidents for typos in their quarterly reports. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through his exhaustion. He stood up, pacing the small living room, stepping over the Legos. What was he supposed to do? Follow it up with, "Sorry, meant for my mom," at 2:20 a.m. That somehow felt worse. It felt pathetic. It highlighted how unprofessional he was, texting executives in the middle of the night. "Okay," Liam muttered to the empty room. "Okay, she's asleep. She has her phone on Do Not Disturb. She's a CEO. She gets 1,000 emails an hour. She won't even read it. She'll delete it. It's fine." He repeated it to himself until his breathing slowed. He turned off his monitors, crawled into bed, and stared at the ceiling until the sun came up, dreading the morning with every fiber of his being. The morning was a blur of burnt toast, missing left shoes, and rushing Chloe to her elementary school drop-off. By the time Liam swiped his badge at the gleaming glass turnstiles of Hayes Logistics headquarters, he felt like a dead man walking. His phone had remained violently silent all morning. No angry calls from HR. No curt emails demanding his immediate resignation. He took the elevator to the 40th floor. The IT department was a hive of nervous energy. The migration had been successful, which meant today was the debriefing. The executive team wanted a full report. "You look like hell," his manager, a nervous man named Greg, said as Liam sat at his desk. "Long night," Liam rasped. "Well, drink a gallon of coffee. Morgan is sitting in on the debrief." Liam felt his stomach drop into his shoes. "Morgan? She never comes to post-mortems." "She's coming to this one. The outage last night nearly cost us the Amazon contract. She wants to look the team in the eye." Greg patted Liam's shoulder. "You saved our asses, Liam. Just explain the patch, keep it technical, and don't make eye contact." At 10 a.m., Liam walked into boardroom A. It was a vast expanse of polished mahogany, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline, and ergonomic leather chairs. The room was already filled with department heads, nervous engineers, and project managers. And at the head of the table sat Morgan Hayes. She was wearing a slate gray suit, her dark hair pulled back into a severe, flawless knot. She was tapping a silver pen against a legal pad, her face completely unreadable. She didn't look up as Liam entered, but he felt a physical weight settle on his chest the moment he saw her. He took a seat near the back, hiding behind Greg. The meeting began. It was a blur of acronyms, timeline graphs, and defensive posturing from the network team. Morgan listened in absolute silence. When someone spoke too long, she simply raised her silver pen a fraction of an inch, and the speaker would immediately stammer to a halt. Finally, it was Eit's turn. Greg stumbled through the introduction and punted the ball to Liam. Liam stood up. His legs felt like lead. He pulled up his slides on the massive screen behind Morgan. The core issue was a redundant loop in the legacy code base," Liam started, his voice sounding thin in the cavernous room. He forced himself to look at the center of the table, avoiding Morgan's end. "It cascaded into the primary servers around midnight. I managed to isolate the loop, rewrite the query structure, and implement a hotfix by 2 a.m. He spoke for 5 minutes, detailing the fix. It was clean, technical, and dry. When he finished, silence hung in the room. Morgan stopped tapping her pen. She slowly raised her head, and her dark, sharp eyes locked onto Liam. The air in the room seemed to thin out. 2 a.m., Morgan said. Her voice was surprisingly soft, yet it carried to every corner of the room. It wasn't a question. "Yes, ma'am." Liam swallowed hard. Morgan held his gaze for 3 agonizing seconds. There was something in her eyes, a tiny, imperceptible shift that Liam couldn't read. It wasn't anger. It wasn't dismissal. "Acceptable," she said softly. She stood up, closing her legal pad. "The crisis is handled. We move forward. Meeting adjourned." The room exhaled a collective, silent sigh of relief. Chairs scraped against the carpet as executives practically ran for the doors. Liam packed up his laptop, his hands shaking slightly. He had survived. She hadn't seen it, or she didn't care. He was halfway to the door when her voice cut through the ambient noise. "Mr. Harding, stay behind, please." Liam froze. Greg shot him a look of profound pity before scurrying out the door, leaving Liam alone in the room with the CEO. The heavy glass doors clicked shut. The silence was absolute, save for the faint hum of the air conditioning. Morgan stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out at the city. She didn't speak. Liam stood by his chair, clutching his laptop like a shield. "Ms. Hayes, if this is about the server downtime, I can assure you the new architecture is—" "I don't care about the servers, Liam," she said, her back still to him. She turned around. The harsh morning light caught the sharp angles of her face. She walked slowly down the length of the table, until she was standing just a few feet away from him. Up close, he could see the faint shadows of exhaustion under her eyes, mirroring his own. She reached into the pocket of her suit jacket and pulled out her phone. She tapped the screen once and placed it face up on the polished mahogany table between them. Liam didn't need to look. He knew what was on the screen. "I can explain," Liam said quickly, his voice tight. "It was a mistake. I was exhausted. I was trying to text my mother. I hit your contact by accident because you were in my recents from the emergency protocol. It was completely unprofessional, and I apologize." Morgan looked at him. She didn't look angry. She looked curious. "You were trying to text your mother," she repeated flatly. "Yes, at 2 in the morning. Yes, she lives in Ohio. I hadn't spoken to her in a while. I was tired. I wasn't thinking straight." Morgan looked down at her phone, then back up at him. She took a half step closer. The scent of her perfume, something expensive, smelling of cedar and cold rain, drifted over him. She leaned in, dropping her voice so low it barely registered over the hum of the AC. "Say it again." Liam blinked, his brain misfiring. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," Morgan whispered. Her eyes were intensely focused on his, stripping away the boardroom, the company, the hierarchy. "Say it again, out loud." I don't understand." "You said you missed me," she said, the words slipping out with a quiet, undeniable force. "Say it." Liam stared at her, completely unmoored. The cynical, terrifying CEO of Hayes Logistics was standing 2 feet away from him, demanding he repeat a mistaken text. He looked for a trap, a hidden camera, a test of his professionalism, but there was only a strange, fractured intensity in her gaze. "I miss you," Liam breathed out, the words feeling foreign and dangerous in his mouth. Morgan closed her eyes for a fraction of a second. A tiny, almost invisible shiver ran through her shoulders. When she opened her eyes, the CEO mask was back, perfectly in place. She picked up her phone and slipped it into her pocket. "Go back to your desk, Mr. Harding," she said, her voice crisp and commanding once more. "Take the rest of the day off. You've earned it." Liam didn't go home. He couldn't. His apartment was too quiet, too full of the echo of his own panic. Instead, he walked. He wandered through the crowded downtown streets, the mid-morning sun beating down on his shoulders, trying to process what had just happened in Boardroom A. Say it again. It wasn't a joke. Morgan Hayes didn't do jokes. It wasn't a power play either, or at least not a standard one. Power plays were loud. They were about making the other person feel small. What she had done felt entirely different. It felt like someone starving, asking for a crumb of bread, but doing it with a gun to your head. He stopped at a small park sitting on a concrete bench near a dry fountain. He pulled out his phone. He stared at the text thread. It was still there. A rational man would brush it off. A rational man would go back to his desk tomorrow, keep his head down, fix databases, and pretend the CEO of his company hadn't just exposed a bizarre psychological crack in her armor. But Liam wasn't feeling particularly rational. He was exhausted, he was lonely, and he was undeniably curious. At 2 p.m., his phone buzzed. Not a text, an email. Sender: morgan.hayes@hayeslogistics.com. Subject: follow up. Body: my office. 3 p.m. Use the private elevator in the east lobby. Liam stared at the screen. So much for taking the day off. At 2:55 p.m., he swiped his badge at the private elevator. It opened with a silent hum, taking him directly to the penthouse floor. The doors parted to reveal a minimalist, terrifyingly clean executive suite. A single assistant sat at a desk that looked like a piece of modern art. "Mr. Harding," the assistant said without looking up. "Go right in." Liam walked toward the heavy oak door and pushed it open. Morgan's office was vast, but unlike the boardroom, it felt deeply personal. The walls were lined with books. Real books, dog-eared and worn, not just decorative spines. A massive mahogany desk anchored the room, but Morgan wasn't sitting behind it. She was standing by a small coffee station in the corner, pouring black coffee into a ceramic mug. She had taken off her suit jacket. Her white button-down shirt was rolled up at the sleeves, revealing a thin silver watch on her wrist. "Close the door," she said, not turning around. Liam pushed the heavy door shut. It latched with a solid, final click. "Do you drink coffee, Liam?" she asked. It was the first time she had used his first name. "I've had enough today to kill a small horse, thank you," he said. Morgan let out a short, quiet breath that might have been a laugh. She turned around, leaning against the counter, holding her mug with both hands. She looked at him for a long, calculating moment. "You're confused," she stated. "I think that's a massive understatement, Ms. Hayes." "Morgan," Liam shifted his weight. "Morgan, I don't know what's happening here. I made a mistake. I apologized. You told me to take the day off, and now I'm here." She walked over to a leather sofa in the center of the room and sat down, gesturing for him to take the armchair opposite her. He sat, feeling entirely out of his depth. "I want to explain my behavior. In the boardroom," Morgan said, her voice clinical, as if she were diagnosing a flaw in a supply chain. "I do not like leaving loose ends. I do not like erratic variables in my company." "I am not an erratic variable. I'm just a tired dad who can't use his thumbs properly at 2 in the morning." Morgan's eyes flicked to his. "A dad?" "Yes, a 6-year-old daughter. Chloe. She's the reason I need this job, which is why I am very anxious about whatever this is." Morgan looked down at her coffee mug, tracing the rim with her thumb. The silence stretched between them, heavy and thick. When she finally spoke, her voice lacked the metallic edge of the CEO. It sounded purely human. "Do you know how many people I talk to in a day, Liam?" "A lot, I'd imagine." "Hundreds," she said. "Board members, investors, politicians, sycophants. Do you know how many of them see me as a person?" Liam didn't answer. "Zero," she answered for him. "To them, I am a bank. I am a hurdle. I am a signature on a contract. I haven't had a conversation in 5 years where someone didn't want something from me. Money, access, power. Every text I get is a demand. Every email is a crisis." She looked up, meeting his eyes. The vulnerability in her gaze was jarring, like seeing a crack in a marble statue. "Last night," Morgan continued, her voice dropping to a near whisper, "my phone buzzed at 2 in the morning. I assumed it was a disaster. I assumed a cargo ship had sunk or the servers had permanently melted down. I opened the message, and it said, 'I miss you too, so much.'" She stopped, taking a slow breath. "For exactly 10 seconds, before my brain logically processed that it was a mistake, I felt something I haven't felt in a very, very long time. I felt like a human being. I felt like someone, somewhere, actually gave a damn about me. Liam felt a knot form in his throat. He looked at this woman, a billionaire, a titan of industry, and saw the profound, crushing loneliness radiating off her. It was a fantasy, obviously, Morgan said, her tone hardening slightly, the armor snapping back into place. I checked the sender. I saw it was you. I deduced it was an error. But those 10 seconds... She looked away, staring out the window at the sprawling city below. They were quiet. I wanted them back. That's why I asked you to repeat it. Liam leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. He didn't see the CEO anymore. He just saw a person who was drowning in plain sight. It wasn't a power trip, Liam said quietly. No. Morgan looked back at him. It was a moment of weakness. And I don't do weakness. Everyone has moments of weakness, Morgan. You run a $40 billion company. You're allowed to want someone to text you just to say hello. She let out a dry, cynical laugh. Billionaires don't get hello texts, Liam. We get invoices. Liam looked down at his own worn shoes, then back up at her. He thought about his messy apartment. He thought about Chloe's sticky hugs and the chaotic, exhausting, beautiful reality of his life. He had nothing in common with the woman sitting across from him. But he knew what it was like to feel isolated. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and unlocked it. He tapped the screen a few times, deliberately and carefully. A second later, Morgan's phone buzzed on the coffee table. She frowned, looking from her phone to Liam. She reached out and picked it up. She swiped the screen. Liam watched her eyes track the short message he had just sent. Hello, Morgan. You did a good job today. Morgan stared at the screen for a long time. The harsh lines of her face softened. She didn't smile, not exactly, but the tension in her jaw uncoiled. She looked up at him. What are you doing, Liam? I'm establishing a baseline, Liam said, his voice steady. I'm not a sycophant. I don't want your money. I just want to keep my job, write good code, and go home to my kid. But if you need someone to text you at 2 in the morning who doesn't want to check, I'm usually awake. Camilla Hayes, the terror of the logistics industry, sat back on her leather sofa. She looked at the tired, grounded, entirely unimpressed man sitting across from her. You're an interesting variable, Mr. Harding, she said quietly. I try to be, Liam replied. Keep your phone on, she said, picking up her coffee. I might hold you to that. The transition back to reality was like stepping out of a soundproof vault onto a highway median. By Wednesday morning, the quiet intimacy of Morgan's office felt like a hallucination, induced by sleep deprivation. Liam was back in the trenches of the IT department, buried under a mountain of support tickets and system diagnostics. The fluorescent lights buzzed. The coffee tasted like copper. And then there was Richard Croft. Croft was the vice president of operations. He was a man who wore suits that cost more than Liam's car and possessed the kind of aggressive, unearned confidence unique to failing upward. He was also the man indirectly responsible for the database crash. 6 months prior, Croft had vetoed a critical server infrastructure upgrade to artificially inflate his department's quarterly savings. Now, he was desperate to pin the resulting near disaster on someone else. Liam was sitting at his desk, deep in a line of code, when Croft's shadow fell over his monitors. Harding, Croft barked. He didn't say it like a name. He said it like a symptom. Liam took his hands off the keyboard and slowly swiveled his chair. Mr. Croft, I just got out of a preliminary review with the board regarding Monday night's little circus, Croft said, adjusting the cuffs of his tailored shirt. The narrative being spun is that your team acted heroically. I, however, am looking at the incident report and I see a catastrophic failure in response time. 2 hours of downtime is unacceptable. The legacy code loop was deeply embedded, Liam explained, keeping his voice carefully neutral. We isolated and patched it faster than the vendor's own SLA dictates. I don't care about the vendor. I care about optics. Croft leaned down, resting his knuckles on Liam's desk. He smelled of expensive cologne and peppermint. I am formally recommending a restructuring of the IT department, outsourcing the database management to a firm in Bangalore. It will cut costs by 40% and eliminate domestic incompetence. Liam felt a familiar, cynical anger tighten his chest. Greg, his manager, had a new baby at home. Half the team were fighting just to keep up with inflation. Croft was going to gut them to cover his own tracks. You can't outsource the core architecture, Liam said, his tone hardening. The security clearance alone. I can do whatever I want, Harding. I'm a vice president. Croft stood up, smoothing his tie. You have until Friday to compile a full audit of your team's access logs from Monday night. If I find a single misstep, you won't just be outsourced. You'll be terminated for negligence. Croft turned and walked away, leaving a wake of anxious silence in the bullpen. Liam stared at his blank monitor. He thought about his daughter, Chloe. He thought about the rent due on the 1st of the month. The system was rigged. It always had been. Guys like Croft built their empires on the backs of guys like Liam, and when the foundation cracked, they simply pointed down. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Liam pulled it out. It wasn't a panicked text from Greg. Morgan Hayes. Board meeting. 5 hours. The CFO is using the word synergy repeatedly. I am considering throwing a chair through the window. Liam stared at the screen. The sheer absurdity of the message, juxtaposed with the threat he had just received, made him let out a short, hollow laugh. He typed back, Liam, don't throw a chair. It's a liability nightmare for HR. Throw a stapler. Much easier to classify as an accidental slip. He watched the little typing bubbles appear almost instantly. Morgan Hayes. Noted. How is the trenches? Liam hesitated. He could tell her about Croft. He had a direct line to the CEO. He could bypass the entire corporate structure and blow the whistle. But he knew how that played out. If he ran to Morgan to fight his battles, he was just another sycophant begging for a favor. He had to beat Croft on the merits, not through back-channel nepotism. Liam. Standard procedure, trying to keep the lights on. Morgan Hayes. Good. Keep your phone close tonight. Liam slipped the phone back into his pocket. The knot of anxiety in his chest hadn't vanished, but it felt different now. Less paralyzing. He looked back at his monitor, pulled up the master access logs for the server upgrade requests over the past year, and began to dig. If Croft wanted an audit, Liam was going to give him one. Friday night arrived with the heavy, humid weight of an impending storm. Liam's apartment was chaotic. Chloe had a fever. Nothing serious, just enough to make her clingy and exhausted. She was currently asleep on Liam's chest on the worn living room sofa, her small hand gripping the fabric of his t-shirt. The television was playing a documentary about deep-sea marine life on low volume. Liam was typing one-handed on his laptop, balancing it precariously on the armrest. He had spent the last 48 hours compiling a bulletproof data trail. The logs didn't lie. They clearly showed Croft digitally signing off on the cancellation of the server failsafes. The VP had traded operational stability for a $300,000 performance bonus. His phone vibrated on the coffee table. He reached for it carefully, trying not to wake Chloe. Morgan Hayes. Are you awake? It was 10:30 p.m. Liam. Yes, daughter has a fever. We are currently watching a squid eat a crab. There was a pause. 2 full minutes passed. Morgan Hayes. I am at a charity gala for the pediatric wing of Memorial Hospital. I am wearing a dress that costs more than a sedan, and I am currently hiding in a utility closet near the kitchens. Liam blinked, a genuine smile cracking through his exhaustion. Liam, why are you hiding in a closet? Morgan Hayes. Because a state senator cornered me by the ice sculpture to ask for a campaign donation. If I stay out there, I will tell him exactly what I think of his tax policies, and our PR department will have a collective stroke. I need an anchor. Talk to me. Liam adjusted his position, feeling Chloe's steady, warm breathing against his collarbone. He thought about Morgan, isolated in a utility closet surrounded by wealth and power, desperate for a normal conversation. Liam, okay, anchor established. Tell me about the closet. What do you see? Morgan Hayes, mops, industrial bleach, a stack of folding chairs. It smells like lemon pine and despair. Liam, sounds luxurious. We have stale Cheerios and children's Tylenol. And the squid. Morgan Hayes, who won? The squid or the crab? Liam, squid. It wasn't even close. Absolute massacre. Morgan Hayes. Nature is ruthlessly efficient. Liam, corporate America is ruthlessly efficient. Nature is just hungry. There's a difference. The typing bubbles hovered on the screen for a long time. When her message finally came through, it shifted the entire tone of the conversation. Morgan Hayes, send me your address. Liam's heart kicked against his ribs. He stared at the text. Liam, Morgan, it's late. My kid is sick. My apartment is a disaster. It's not a place for a CEO. Morgan Hayes, I don't want a CEO's place. I want your place. Send the address, Liam, please. The word please from Morgan Hayes felt like a physical weight. He typed out the address of his modest apartment complex in the suburbs and hit send. 40 minutes later, a sleek black town car pulled into the cracked asphalt parking lot of Liam's building. He watched from his second-story window. The rain had started, coming down in thick, heavy sheets. The back door opened. Morgan stepped out. She wasn't wearing a coat. She was wearing a floor-length backless gown of midnight blue silk that clung to her like liquid glass. She looked completely alien standing next to a row of rusted sedans and overflowing dumpsters. Liam buzzed her up. He opened his front door, holding a sleeping Chloe against his shoulder. Morgan stood in the hallway. Her hair was damp from the rain, and the hem of her ridiculous dress was soaked. She looked at Liam, then down at the little girl sleeping against him. The sharp, terrifying edges of the CEO vanished entirely. She looked devastatingly tired and undeniably beautiful. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of the rain hitting the roof. I shouldn't have come. Come inside, Morgan, Liam said softly, stepping back to let her in. She walked into the small apartment, moving awkwardly in the heavy silk. She looked at the Lego bricks, the mismatched furniture, the stack of mail on the counter. She didn't look at it with judgment. She looked at it with a kind of desperate hunger. Do you want a towel? Liam asked. No. She wrapped her arms around herself. She's so small. She's a tank when she's awake, Liam whispered, gently swaying to keep Chloe asleep. You left a Billionaire's gala to stand in my living room. I told you, Morgan said, her dark eyes locking onto his. I needed something real. Everything in my life is a transaction. This, she gestured vaguely to the apartment, to him. This isn't. She took a step closer. The scent of rain and cedar filled the space between them. For a second, Liam thought she was going to lean in and kiss him. The tension was thick enough to choke on, but she didn't. Instead, she reached out a trembling hand and gently, almost reverently, touched the top of Chloe's head, smoothing her hair. You're a good man, Liam, she whispered. I'm just a guy trying to survive the week, he replied. Morgan pulled her hand back. The mask slipped back into place, though the edges were softer now. I should go. I just needed to see it, to make sure you weren't just a voice in my phone. I'm real, Liam said. I know. She turned toward the door. I'll see you on Monday. We have an operational review board. I know, Liam said, his voice tightening slightly as he remembered Croft. Morgan paused, her hand on the doorknob. She looked back over her shoulder, her eyes narrowing slightly. You sound tense. Is there a problem with the review? Liam looked at the woman who controlled the fate of 40,000 employees. He thought about the audit on his laptop. He shook his head. No problem, Liam said. I'm looking forward to it. Monday morning at 9 a.m., Boardroom A was a theater of execution. Richard Croft sat at the center of the long mahogany table, flanked by HR representatives and legal counsel. He looked predatory, his files neatly stacked in front of him. Liam sat on the opposite side, alone. Greg had been barred from the meeting, a clear signal that management was looking to isolate and eliminate. At 9:02 a.m., the heavy glass doors opened. Morgan Hayes walked in. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Croft immediately stood up, looking flustered. Ms. Hayes, we didn't expect you. This is just a mid-level departmental review regarding the outage. I am aware of what it is, Richard, Morgan said, her voice like cracking ice. She didn't look at Liam as she walked to the head of the table and sat down. Proceed. Croft cleared his throat, projecting his voice to the room. Thank you. We are here to address the catastrophic failure of the primary database on Tuesday night. After a thorough review, it is my professional assessment that the IT architecture team, specifically Mr. Harding, demonstrated a gross negligence in system maintenance. I am recommending immediate termination for cause and a complete restructuring of the department. He slid a bound folder across the table toward Liam. These are the failure logs. The loop should have been caught months ago. Liam didn't touch the folder. He looked at Croft, feeling a cold, calm certainty wash over him. You're right, Mr. Croft, Liam said, his voice steady. The loop should have been caught. In fact, it was. Croft frowned. Excuse me? Liam opened his laptop. He tapped a few keys, throwing a document onto the massive screen behind Morgan. This is an internal memo from 7 months ago, Liam said, pointing to the screen. Drafted by my manager, Greg, and sent directly to your office. It details the exact vulnerability in the legacy code that caused Tuesday's crash. It requested a $40,000 budget approval to implement the necessary fail-safes. Croft's face tightened. I receive thousands of memos, Harding. I cannot be expected to babysit your department. You didn't ignore it, Liam countered. He pressed another key. A new document appeared. This is the digital access log from your terminal. 2 days after the memo was sent, you accessed the file, attached a denial of budget approval, and permanently archived the request. A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the boardroom. The HR reps shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. Liam wasn't finished. He brought up a third slide. This is a ledger of the operations department's Q3 budget. By denying the $40,000 upgrade, you pushed your departmental savings just over the threshold required to trigger your executive performance bonus, a bonus of $300,000. This is fabricated garbage! Croft slammed his hand on the table, his face flushing dark red. He pointed a trembling finger at Liam. You hacked my terminal. This is a federal offense. You're trying to cover your own incompetence with manufactured data. The data is pulled directly from the encrypted master server, Liam said quietly. It's time-stamped and immutable. You sold the company's operational stability for a bonus, Richard. And when the bill came due, you tried to fire my team to bury the evidence. Croft looked wildly around the room, realizing the trap had closed. He looked at Morgan. Morgan, Ms. Hayes, you cannot believe this low-level engineer over your vice president. He's cornered. He's lying. Morgan had been sitting in absolute, terrifying stillness throughout the exchange. She slowly picked up her silver pen and tapped it once against her legal pad. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet room. She turned her gaze slowly to Croft. "I despise incompetence, Richard," Morgan said, her voice dropping to a low, lethal register. "But I can tolerate it, if it is paired with loyalty. What I cannot tolerate is a coward." Croft swallowed hard, sweating through his expensive suit. "Ms. Hayes, you compromised the infrastructure of a $40 billion logistics network to pad your own wallet," she continued, standing up. "And then, instead of taking accountability, you attempted to destroy the livelihood of the men who spent their night fixing your mess." She looked at the HR representatives. "Mr. Croft is terminated immediately, for cause. Escort him to his office, supervise the clearing of his desk, and ensure his security badge is deactivated before he reaches the lobby. I want our legal team to review the terms of his bonus for immediate clawback." Croft opened his mouth to argue, but the look in Morgan's eyes killed the words in his throat. He looked destroyed. He stood up, his arrogance completely shattered, and let the HR reps lead him out of the room. The heavy doors clicked shut behind him. Liam sat back in his chair, exhaling a breath he felt like he'd been holding for 3 days. He had done it. He had protected his team. The system wasn't entirely rigged. Not today. Morgan remained standing at the head of the table. She looked at the remaining legal counsel. "Leave us." Within 10 seconds, the boardroom was empty, save for Liam and Morgan. The harsh executive executioner vanished. Morgan leaned her hands on the mahogany table and looked down the length of it at Liam. There was a profound, quiet respect in her eyes. "You didn't ask for my help," she said. "It was my fight," Liam replied, closing his laptop. "I had the data. I just needed a room full of people who couldn't ignore it." "You took down a vice president. I defended my team." Croft took himself down. Morgan pushed off the table and began to walk slowly toward him. The sharp clicking of her heels on the carpet was the only sound in the room. She stopped next to his chair, looking down at him. "You are incredibly dangerous, Liam Harding," she murmured. "I'm an IT architect. You are a man who doesn't care about my money, who isn't intimidated by my title, and who just systematically dismantled an executive without breaking a sweat." She tilted her head, a faint, almost dangerous smile playing on her lips. "I don't know what to do with you." Liam looked up at her. The exhaustion was still there, but beneath it, a quiet, undeniable electricity hummed between them. "You could start," Liam said softly, "by letting me buy you a cup of coffee. A real one, not from the machine in your office." Morgan stared at him for a long moment. Then the billionaire CEO of Hayes Logistics did something nobody in that building had ever seen her do. She smiled. "Okay," Morgan said, "but I'm driving." She drove a matte gray Porsche Panamera that purred like a sleeping predator. Liam sat in the passenger seat, feeling the ridiculous contrast between the hand-stitched leather beneath him and his faded denim jeans. Morgan navigated the midday city traffic with the same ruthless efficiency she used in boardrooms. She didn't use the horn. She simply found gaps and took them, assuming other drivers would yield to the sheer cost of her front bumper. "Where are we going?" she asked, her eyes fixed on a delivery truck she was currently outmaneuvering. "Take the next right. Head toward the warehouse district," Liam said. "If I'm picking the coffee, we're not going anywhere with valet parking." 10 minutes later, Morgan pulled the Porsche to a stop in front of a brick building that looked like it had survived a bombing run. The sign above the door read, Al's Roastery in neon tubing, though the A and the S were burned out. Morgan cut the engine. She looked at the grimy storefront, then at Liam. "Are you trying to poison me to seize control of the company?" "The aesthetic is terrible," Liam admitted, unbuckling his seatbelt. "But Al buys his beans direct from a co-op in Colombia, and he roasts them in a cast-iron drum from 1952. It's the best coffee in the state, trust me." They walked inside. The air was thick with the smell of scorched sugar and dark roast. The floor was scuffed concrete. A few college students typing furiously on laptops occupied the mismatched tables. No one looked up when a billionaire walked in. In here, she was just a woman in a sharp suit. Liam ordered 2 black coffees. He paid with a crumpled $10 bill before Morgan could even reach for her bag. They took their mugs to a small table in the back corner, wedged between a structural pillar and a rattling radiator. Morgan wrapped both hands around the chipped ceramic mug. She took a tentative sip. Her eyebrows shot up. She took another, longer sip. "I told you," Liam said, leaning back in his creaking wooden chair. "It's acceptable," she said, which Liam already knew was the highest praise she offered. They sat in silence for a few minutes. It wasn't the heavy, loaded silence of the boardroom. It was the quiet of 2 people who were profoundly tired, finally sitting still. "So," Morgan said, setting her mug down. "Richard Croft." "I don't want to talk about Croft," Liam said flatly. "I spend 60 hours a week dealing with Hayes Logistics. I'm off the clock." "I own Hayes Logistics, Liam. It's not a job for me. It's my name on the building. It's my entire life. It doesn't have to be." "Yes, it does." She crossed her arms, leaning forward slightly. "My father built it from a single freight truck. When he died, the board tried to carve it up and sell it for scraps. I was 26. I spent the next 8 years gutting the executive suite and rebuilding the supply chain just to keep the vultures from taking my family's legacy. If I stop paying attention even for a second, someone like Croft tries to burn it down for a bonus." Liam looked at her. He saw the ironclad armor she wore every day. He also saw how heavy it was. "That sounds exhausting," he said quietly. "It is." Morgan looked away, staring at the scarred wooden table. "I don't have friends, Liam. I have strategic alliances. I don't have hobbies. I have quarterly projections. When you texted me, it was the first time in nearly a decade someone spoke to me without calculating my net worth first. It was an accident." "I know." She looked back at him, her dark eyes piercing. "But everything that happened after wasn't." Liam shifted in his chair. The proximity of her was overwhelming. The stark contrast between the ruthless CEO, who had just fired a man without blinking, and the woman sitting in a dingy coffee shop looking for a lifeline, was dizzying. "What happens now, Morgan?" Liam asked, keeping his voice grounded. "We work together. You're the CEO. I'm an IT architect. The HR manual alone would spontaneously combust if they knew we were having coffee. I write the HR manual," she stated simply. "That's not the point. You live in penthouses and go to charity galas with state senators. I clip coupons for dinosaur-shaped chicken nuggets and pray my transmission holds out until tax season. We don't fit." "I don't care about fitting," Morgan said, her voice dropping to that low, intense register. "I care about what works. And right now, sitting here with you in a place that smells like engine oil and burned beans, my chest doesn't feel like it's going to cave in. That works for me." She reached across the table. Her fingers, cool and smooth, brushed against his knuckles. A jolt of pure electricity shot up Liam's arm. "Don't run away from this because of a tax bracket, Liam," she whispered. Liam looked at her hand, resting on his. He turned his palm up, his calloused fingers interlacing with hers. He squeezed gently. "I'm not running," Liam said, "but you need to understand something. Chloe is my priority. My life is chaotic. It's messy. If you step into it, you step into the mess. Morgan's lips curved into a faint, genuine smile. Mr. Harding, I specialize in logistics. I can handle a little mess. Handling the mess was easier said than done. 2 weeks passed. They were careful. There were no more dramatic boardroom showdowns or private elevator rides during business hours. Their connection lived in the quiet spaces. Late-night texts when Chloe was asleep. A stolen lunch in a deserted wing of the building. A Friday night where Morgan ordered Thai takeout and ate it cross-legged on Liam's faded living room rug, while Chloe showed her how to build a Lego spaceship. For 14 days, it felt like a secret universe built just for them. Then the real world broke the door down. It started on a Wednesday. Liam walked into the IT bullpen and immediately felt the shift in air pressure. Conversations stopped. Heads turned. Greg, his manager, wouldn't make eye contact. By noon, Liam knew why. A blind item had been published on a prominent financial gossip blog. It didn't use names, but it didn't have to. Which logistics queen of ice has been thawing out with a mid-level basement dweller from her own tech department? Sources say the recent dramatic firing of a VP was orchestrated to protect her new blue-collar boy toy. Corporate governance, anyone? Liam stared at his monitor, his stomach twisting into a cold, hard knot. Boy toy. Orchestrated. They had taken the one clean, victorious moment of his career, stopping Croft, and turned it into a dirty, nepotistic favor. His phone buzzed. Morgan. Morgan. My office. Now. He didn't use the private elevator this time. He took the main one. Let them look. When he reached the executive floor, the tension was palpable. The assistant waved him through immediately. Morgan's office wasn't empty. Sitting on the leather sofa was Arthur Vance, the chairman of the board. He was a man in his late 60s with a silver mane of hair and eyes like chipped flint. He was the only person in the company who could mathematically challenge Morgan's authority. Morgan stood behind her desk. She looked furious. "Liam, come in," she said, her voice tight. Arthur didn't stand up. He looked Liam up and down, taking in his untucked button-down and scuffed boots. His lip curled slightly. "So, this is the systems architect," Arthur said. His voice was smooth, cultured, and dripping with condescension. "Mr. Harding, you've caused quite a stir." "I fix servers, Mr. Vance," Liam said evenly. "I don't cause stirs. The blog post says otherwise." Arthur turned his attention back to Morgan. "Optics, Morgan. We are 2 weeks away from closing the merger with Pacific Freight. We cannot have the CEO embroiled in a messy HR scandal with a subordinate. The board is nervous. They're asking questions about Croft's termination." "Croft was terminated for attempting to defraud the company," Morgan snapped. "The data proved it." "The data provided by the man you are currently sleeping with," Arthur countered smoothly. Liam felt a surge of hot, violent anger. He took a step forward. "Watch how you speak to her," Arthur laughed, a dry, rattling sound. "Gallant, but irrelevant. Morgan, you are brilliant, but you are slipping. You are letting personal indulgences threaten a multi-billion-dollar deal. I am formally requesting that Mr. Harding be transferred to the regional office in Denver until the merger is complete. It removes the conflict of interest and cleans up the narrative." Morgan's hands gripped the edge of her desk. Her knuckles were white. "You can't mandate a transfer, Arthur. You're the chairman, not the CEO. "I can call a vote of no confidence," Arthur replied calmly. "And right now, with this scandal, I would win it. Denver, Morgan, or he's fired. Pick one." Arthur stood up, buttoned his suit jacket, and walked out of the office without looking back. The heavy oak door clicked shut. Silence rushed into the room, thick and suffocating. Morgan stared at the closed door, her chest rising and falling rapidly. The armor was back on, bolted tight. "I'll fight him," she said, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. "I have enough leverage on 2 of the board members to swing the vote. I just need a week to compile the financials." "Morgan, stop!" Liam's voice was quiet. It cut through her panic like a knife. He walked over to the desk. He looked at the woman who had sat on his floor eating pad thai. She looked terrified, not of losing the company, but of losing the control she had spent her life building. "They're going to use me, to tear you apart," Liam said. "They're going to dig into my life. They'll find my ex-wife. They'll find my custody agreement. They'll put cameras outside Chloe's school to get a picture of you. I can hire security. I can fix it. You can't fix this with money, Morgan." Liam leaned his hands on her desk, bringing his face level with hers. "I told you, I am a dad first. I will not let my daughter become collateral damage in a corporate boardroom war." Morgan's breath hitched. "You're quitting." "I'm protecting my kid," Liam said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "And I'm protecting you. If you fight Arthur on this, you risk the company, your father's company. I'm not going to be the reason you lose everything you built." "Liam, please!" The CEO was gone. It was just Morgan now, desperate and breaking. "Don't do this. I ordered you to stay." "I don't take orders from you anymore," Liam said softly. He reached out, touching her cheek one last time. Her skin was cold. He pulled his hand back, turned around, and walked out of the office. By 4 p.m., his desk was packed into a single cardboard box. By 5 p.m., his badge was deactivated. He was unemployed, entirely cut off from the fortress of Hayes logistics, and walking back into the real world alone. 2 weeks felt like 2 years. Liam found contract work quickly. Good architects were always in demand. But it felt hollow. His apartment was too quiet. The rhythm of his days was broken. Every time his phone buzzed, a spike of adrenaline hit his chest, only to fade into dull disappointment when it wasn't her. He hadn't texted her. She hadn't texted him. They had drawn a hard, bloody line, and neither was willing to cross it. It was a Saturday afternoon. The autumn air was crisp and biting. Liam was at the local neighborhood park, pushing Chloe on the swings. The leaves on the oak trees were turning a violent, brilliant red. "Higher, Daddy!" Chloe shrieked, kicking her small sneakers toward the sky. "You're already in orbit, kiddo." Liam laughed, giving her back a gentle push. He stepped back, shoving his hands into his jacket pockets. He watched his daughter, trying to focus on the simple, perfect reality of her joy. It was enough. It had to be enough. "Her form is terrible. She's not utilizing the momentum of her downswing." Liam froze. The voice came from behind him, crisp, clinical, and completely out of place in a suburban playground. He turned around slowly. Morgan was standing near the edge of the wood chips. She wasn't wearing a suit. She was wearing dark denim jeans, a heavy wool sweater, and a leather jacket. Her hair was down, blowing slightly in the autumn wind. She looked breathtaking. Liam's heart hammered against his ribs. He took a step toward her, then stopped. "What are you doing here, Morgan?" "I'm conducting a site visit," she said, her face unreadable. "Assessing the structural integrity of this playground equipment." "Morgan." She dropped the act. She took a deep breath, stepping onto the wood chips, walking until she was only 2 feet away from him. "The merger closed yesterday," she said quietly. "Congratulations. Arthur must be thrilled." "Arthur is no longer with the company," Morgan stated. Liam blinked. "What?" "When you left, they thought they had one. They thought I was pacified." A dangerous, familiar light sparked in Morgan's eyes. They forgot who they were dealing with. "I spent the last 2 weeks quietly auditing the board's expense accounts. Arthur has been funneling company funds into a private shell corporation in the Caymans for 4 years. I dropped the file on the SEC's desk yesterday morning. He resigned by noon to avoid immediate prosecution. Liam stared at her, completely stunned. You burned the chairman of the board. He threatened my company, and he threatened my... She stopped. She looked at Liam, the fierce armor melting away, leaving only raw, terrifying vulnerability. He threatened you. Morgan, you didn't have to do that. Yes, I did, she said fiercely. I spent my whole life building walls to keep people out because I thought that was how you survive. But survival isn't living, Liam. Sitting in that penthouse office, looking at the city, knowing you were gone. It was a tomb. She took the final step, closing the distance between them. She looked up at him, her dark eyes wide and pleading. I fired the PR firm, she whispered. I rewrote the HR bylaws. There is no conflict of interest because you don't work for me anymore. You're just a man, and I'm just a woman. The mess is gone, Liam. Or at least, the corporate mess is. I am entirely willing to deal with the Legos. Liam looked at her. He thought of the sheer, terrifying force of will it took for a woman like Morgan Hayes to tear down her own empire, just to make room for him. You're crazy, Liam breathed. I'm efficient, Morgan corrected. A small, shaky smile touching her lips. Over on the swings, Chloe dragged her feet in the wood chips, slowing herself down. She looked over and saw Morgan. Her face lit up. Morgan, Chloe yelled, unceremoniously tumbling out of the swing and sprinting toward them. Morgan knelt in the wood chips. Designer jeans be damned, and caught the 6-year-old as she barreled into her. She wrapped her arms tightly around Chloe, burying her face in the little girl's hair for a second. Liam watched them, feeling a massive, crushing weight lift off his chest. The two, completely different halves of his fractured universe, had just collided, and instead of destroying each other, they fit perfectly. Morgan stood up, holding Chloe's hand. She looked at Liam. The fear was gone from her eyes. It's cold out here, Morgan said softly. Are you going to invite me in? Liam smiled, a real deep smile that reached all the way to his eyes. He stepped forward, reaching out to tuck a stray lock of hair behind Morgan's ear. On one condition, Liam whispered, his voice dropping low for her ears only. Morgan's breath hitched. What? Liam leaned in, his lips hovering just an inch from hers. He looked into the eyes of the billionaire CEO who had burned down a boardroom for him. Say it again, Liam murmured. Morgan's eyes fluttered shut. She leaned into him, closing the final inch. I miss you, she whispered against his lips. So much. What happens when a 2 a.m. mistake becomes the most important text of your life? Liam and Morgan proved that sometimes the biggest risks aren't taken in the boardroom, but in the heart. True power isn't about control. It's about having the courage to tear down your own walls for the right person. If you loved watching this icy CEO melt for a grounded single dad, smash that like button. Share this video with a hopeless romantic and make sure to subscribe to the channel for more deeply human, unforgettable stories. Drop a comment below. Would you have sent that text?